Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are absolutely cutting right through the noise to figure out what actually creates financial security. I mean, it's not about heavily guarded secrets, and it's definitely not about overnight luck. For most of us, it really just boils down to one surprisingly mundane thing: making better decisions consistently over a long period of time.
So let's just dive right in with a pretty frustrating reality. Be honest. Have you ever wondered why so many people work for 4 whole decades, giving their absolute best energy to their jobs, and yet they still lie awake at night worrying about money? It's like the math just doesn't seem to add up, right?
And that exact frustration leads us to a frankly wild statistic. Fully 90% of people never become wealthy. 90%. And look, it's not because the system is just completely rigged against them at every single turn. It's usually because they fall into some incredibly predictable traps. But to really wrap our heads around why this number is so staggeringly high, we have to clear away some deeply ingrained myths first.
Before we look at the real culprit, we need to eliminate what isn't holding them back. First off, the people struggling, they are not lazy. In fact, they're often working incredibly hard. It's not a lack of smarts either. And actually, scratch that common assumption, it isn't always an income problem. You can pull in a fantastic salary and still end up completely broke. So if it isn't laziness, intelligence, or purely the size of the paycheck, what is actually holding the vast majority of people back?
Well, the real culprit is a cycle. It's repeating the exact same financial mistakes for decades without even realizing it. Bad financial habits, when they're just repeated blindly over the years, turn into these quiet forces holding people down. So today, we're going to break down exactly what those invisible mistakes are and how you can dodge them.
Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We've grouped 7 of the most common financial mistakes into 5 clear pillars. First, the wealth illusion. Then, managing your money. Third, expanding your foundation. Fourth, the psychology of wealth. And finally, building better habits.
All right, let's start right at the top with Section 1, the wealth illusion, and how to avoid the trap of instant riches. You know how every single year, a bunch of new get-rich-quick promises pop up? They're like flashing slot machines, promising all these effortless shortcuts, which is exactly what the 90% end up chasing. But financially successful people, they operate on a completely different frequency. They treat wealth more like planting a tree. It requires patience, immense discipline, and long-term investing. They know for a fact that true wealth is a marathon, definitely not a sprint.
Moving right along to Section 2, managing your money. Let's look at how this builds into the everyday flow of saving and spending.
So much of this just comes down to everyday cash flow. The standard approach for most people is to spend throughout the month and then sort of cross their fingers and try to save whatever happens to be left over. The problem? There's rarely anything left. The successful approach flips this entirely. Save first, then spend what remains. Setting up a small automatic transfer on payday is literally the vital difference between hoping for leftovers and actively taking control of your future.
And you absolutely have to prioritize investing because of the silent wealth killer, inflation. Thinking your cash is totally safe just sitting idle under a mattress or in a checking account making zero interest is a massive trap. Successful people know that inflation quietly eats away at your purchasing power every single day. That's exactly why they use diversified portfolios and retirement accounts. It's not about taking wild, unnecessary risks. It's about actively protecting their money's value over time.
Okay, let's transition over to our third pillar, expanding your foundation. This is all about building resilience through growing your income and your knowledge. There's this huge point of failure that so many of us overlook, relying on just one paycheck. Think about it. If your entire income comes from a single source, your financial stress is inherently going to be higher. Because if that job suddenly disappears, the whole house of cards collapses. That's why building resilience is absolutely key. Gradually adding additional streams, like a side business, some freelance work, maybe digital products, isn't about working yourself into the ground. It's just ensuring a single bump in the road doesn't completely derail your life.
Expanding that foundation also requires education, because hey, knowledge compounds just like money does. Traditional schools rarely teach personal finance, right? It is entirely up to us to learn about budgeting, taxes, and financial planning. Just like compound interest in a bank account, taking the time to absorb this information pays massive, massive dividends over the course of your life.
Let's move into our fourth section, the psychology of wealth. Because building wealth isn't just about the math, it requires some serious psychological endurance, especially when it comes to ignoring comparisons.
The modern wealth trap is 100% fueled by comparison.
Social media makes it so incredibly easy to believe everyone else is getting richer, driving nicer cars, and taking these lavish vacations. But spending money you don't have just to keep up appearances, that's a surefire way to derail your goals. Financially successful people know a little secret. They focus way less on impressing strangers on the internet and much, much more on quietly building their own long-term, unshakable security.
Which brings us to our fifth and final section, building better habits. This is where we tie everything together so we can escape that 90% statistic by choosing consistency over perfection.
One of the biggest mistakes people make is simply giving up way too soon. Wealth takes time, and so many quit when the results aren't immediate. To break out of that cycle, try this three-step approach. First, just choose one lesson from today. Second, apply it consistently. And third, let time work in your favor. Consistency matters so much more than perfection in this journey.
Think about this over a timeline, and you see exactly how those small, smart decisions compound. In month 1, maybe you just start a really small automatic savings transfer. By month 6, you've trained yourself to actively ignore those quick fix schemes. By a year, you've built real consistency. And 10 years down the line, that is when you see a truly life-changing financial impact. The whole shebang is built just one decision at a time.
I really want to leave you with this incredibly empowering thought. You do not have to be born wealthy to change your financial trajectory. You don't need a massive inheritance, and you definitely don't need to be flawless. You simply need better habits today than you had yesterday. If you can manage that, you are already breaking away from the 90%.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to take a second and reflect on your own daily routines. Which financial mistake do you think holds back the most people? And, more importantly, which one might be holding you back? Take a moment to really mull that over. Thanks so much for joining me. Keep building those consistent habits, and we will see you next time.